What's going on, guys? Phil here with Custom Offsets TV on the YouTube, and today we're going to be talking about the difference between bracket lifts and knuckle lifts. So we've been getting a couple questions, with Rough Country bringing in their bracket lift, and people are just asking, what's better, bracket lift or a knuckle lift? What are the differences, and which one should I run? So before we dive completely into it, I did want to give you a little bit of history on lift kits and kind of explain where these two different types of kits came from. So back in the day, trucks had leaf springs for the front, and then they moved to IFS, or independent front suspension, and that's when the introduction of like a bracket lift came into play. And as trucks progressed and technology got better and better, and people realized that these bracket lifts weren't quite holding up, they developed a knuckle lift kit. And then more and more people were going to the knuckle lift kits because they were much stronger. And the reason why they didn't come out with knuckle kits originally is because most of the factories that are casting these lift knuckles simply weren't able to make them, and they could just manufacture a bracket kit rather than cast these huge knuckles. They didn't have the factories and the technology to do that size casting way back when. And then as factories got bigger and bigger, like I said, they were able to make these knuckles and realize that the knuckle kits were much stronger. So throughout the history of trucks, there's been different kind of styles and fads that are in and out. Like right now, a lot of people are running a very aggressive stance look with their wheels and tires sticking out super far, but not that long ago, people didn't want that. So people were opting to go with a bracket lift because it didn't increase front track width, and therefore it kept your wheels and tires in basically the factory mounting points, whereas a knuckle lift kit, a lot of them now are sticking out about 1.5 inches on each side. So that's a pretty big increase for front track width, and some people don't want their wheels to stick out that far. So if they're trying to run factory wheels or OEM sizes and they didn't want them to stick out that far, or they didn't want the front to be out wide and the back to be tucked in, that's why people were opting to go with a bracket lift. With the bracket lift, because it's using your stock knuckles and all your stock steering components and everything like that, it does allow you to run factory wheels, which means you can still run your spare if you were to have some issue with your wheels and tires. A bracket lift is a much more complicated setup than a knuckle lift, so there's a lot more parts involved, which also means there's a lot more labor involved just because there are so many more parts. So a bracket lift will basically take your OEM suspension and drop everything down. We'll kind of dive into what a knuckle lift is in a little bit to compare the two, but lift kits on both ends of the spectrum are going to drop your lower control arm. The difference is mainly in the upper control arm. So a bracket lift uses a bracket, hence the name, to relocate where your stock upper control arms mount. So it's using the factory knuckle and the factory control arms, both lower and upper, but using brackets to relocate where those mount. And again, that's just pushing all of your suspension down closer to the ground, which in turn lifts your truck up. A knuckle lift replaces your OEM knuckle with a new knuckle. It's a much taller knuckle, and that's where your lift comes from. And then most times they're giving you new upper control arms so that you can have correct angles and everything like that. So when it comes to differences between the two kits, there's not really a whole lot that people argue back and forth on, but one of the biggest things that people do care about is the strength of the kit. So from what I'm hearing from the guys who install them and the people that are running them is they don't believe bracket kits are quite as strong as those knuckle kits, because those knuckles, that's one solid cast piece of metal. They're super heavy duty. If you've ever seen them off of a truck, I'm sure we'll show you a clip of what they look like, but pretty beefy, so you don't have to worry about things breaking, and that's where all your lift's coming from. Whereas the bracket kit is just a fabricated, a couple pieces of metal put together to drop your stock components down. And if you're adding all that extra weight with bigger wheels and tires and all that extra rolling mass, it can be kind of risky putting all that weight onto your stock components. And that's why most people go with the knuckle lift. So the biggest downfall I see with bracket lifts is that there's just more components to install, which makes the installation process a little more complicated, and the fact that you're dropping down extra components. So in a knuckle kit, you don't need to drop the steering rack, but on a bracket kit, you do. So all those steering components drop down, and there's new hardware for that, new ends, and it's a lot of components that gets kind of confusing. You also need to do a little bit more cutting. So on almost every bracket kit that's out there, you need to cut out the upper control arm stops where they would droop down, because you're installing a new bracket that just won't bolt up unless you cut those stops out of there. On the opposite side of things, the biggest downfall I can come up with for a knuckle lift kit is just that increased front track width. So what I mean by that is it increases the track width, or how wide your wheels are on each side, by about 1.5 inches. So it's really easy to fix though, because you can just add spacers in the rear to get those sitting flush, and then you don't have to worry about it. So to give you guys an idea on pricing, I went out and compared the 7-inch Rough Country bracket kit versus the 7-inch Knuckle kit. And what I found was, because there's more components in that bracket kit, it drives the price up. So a standard 7-inch kit for like the 14 to 18 GM 1500s is right around $1,000. If you get the bracket kit, it's upwards of $1,200 with all those extra components installed. And then if you want the bracket kit with upgraded struts, you're looking at about $1,400. So those bracket kits are more expensive, mostly just due to the increase in parts. And that also means you might be paying more for install as well, because it's a little more labor intensive. So let us know in the comments which one you would rather run, a bracket lift or a knuckle lift, or if you have experiences with either one of them, drop your thoughts below in the comments. Make sure you like this video, hit the subscribe button because we're trying to reach 200K. I'm Fuller from Custom Offsets. Peace.